Hello, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Enable Your Security Team to Build Better Remediation Partnerships. Before we get started, there's one housekeeping item to keep in mind. Today's webinar will be recorded and will be made available on demand shortly after the broadcast. Now let's get started. My name is Ryan Powell, and I'm the Senior Director of Marketing at CyCognito. And I'm pleased to be joined today by Anne Marie Zettlemoyer, Chief Security Officer at CyCognito, and Mike Johnson, who's the co-host of the CISO Series podcast. Thanks for joining us today, Anne Marie and Mike. We look forward to your discussion.
Okay, great. Are we ready to roll then?
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
I've been looking forward to this. I'm so excited. Thanks, Mike, for being here and being such a good friend over all of these years. I often say that, it takes a village, but it also takes a tribe, right? A tribe of peers to kind of get each other through these experiences, and also to realize that no challenge is unique. I think sometimes security can be somewhat isolating and you feel like I'm the only one that's going through this. Maybe I have these headwinds, until you start surrounding yourself with really good peers and that you can lean on and ask questions for. And I know you're going to find someone that says, I've been there. Here's how I handled it, and guide you through that. And I'm just so grateful that that we're in each other's space that way. And it's a great segue for the topic here about how it takes a village to secure anything. So thanks again for coming on with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Like you said, I think I'm not convinced that there's new problems in security. There's new solutions, but there's always someone else out there that has solved it before. And having these conversations, these relationships that you can catch up with peers who have been there, have done that, it's a great opportunity to learn. So I'm really happy to be here today, sit down and chat with you.
Yeah, it's a great way to scale experience and scale knowledge, right? Is to make sure that
Absolutely.
we pour into the community these types of insights so that we can all work together to be more secure. So this is a great segue. Today we're going to talk about how to actually get things done in security and how to build something that works. And, I would love for you to kick this off, Mike, on kind of your experience. You've been a CISO many times over now. And as as a podcast owner and presenter, you've also talked to every CISO regularly about their own experiences. And it surprises me how many times I get this notion from others who haven't been in the seat that, security is sort of like an island and it's the land of no. And they, kind of frame it like we say we have to do something or you have to do something and therefore it gets done. And that's just, as well as I do, that is not how things work. Okay. Okay. And nor should it. I mean, that's a terrible thing to do to people. So talk to me about your experiences, Mike, and kind of how you frame and think about what it takes to get things done in security and how important partnerships in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I like that you commented on the people who've been in the seat and those who haven't, and like the perceptions. One of the common discussions that we have on the podcast is you don't want your team to be the department of no. But I've never met a single CISO, and I've spoken with probably hundreds at this point, who thought that their team was a department of no. I really think that's an external perception versus the way that our teams think of ourselves. And it's hard, it's impossible to get anything done without those relationships. And I also think that every CISO unfortunately learns it the hard way. I learned it the hard way. When I was, some people have asked me about, what is your biggest mistake that you've made in the past or something like that. And one of the challenges that I had in a previous role was I did not make good relationships with the engineering team. And that slowed everything down. And the perception that I'd had was, well, my team is empowered to make changes. We are an engineering team ourselves. We have the ability to make changes. We'll just go make the changes. We'll secure everything ourselves.
Oof.
And that did not work.
I was going to say, how did that work out for you?
Exactly as well as you think it did, or maybe even worse than you think it did. It was a combination of, we got a few little wins here and there, and so those felt good in the moment. But over time, when there is a necessity to make bigger changes, when there is a need to go out to an engineering team or a product team and say, we need you to make this change in your product, in your area, in your set of code, those conversations were really difficult. And they would end up in, frankly, gridlock. Like, the change wouldn't get made. And that would be a detriment to the organization. Versus what I've learned is to actually, from day one in a new position as a new CISO, or new CISO in an organization, find out who those people are and establish those relationships. It can be as simple as having a weekly or bi-weekly one-on-one with them. Whoever your head of engineering is, your head of technology, your head of IT, whoever, find out who that person is, just set up a regular one-on-one and get to know each other. And then what you're really doing with that is establishing trust. And that's the key. That's the thing that you need with your relationships, is a mutual trust of each other. And that together can really propel the security of an organization going forward. So that's really been my experience with relationships, like both learning the hard way, but also in talking with so many others. The effective CISOs out there have those relationships with other leaders within the organization, and those other leaders are on board and supportive of changes. You're greeted with a level playing field of trust, rather than of this is the security team, they're coming with the Department of No.
Right.
So very much about the relationships.
It's so a couple of key points that I picked up while you were talking is, it's very true that none of us really want to approach it or even mean to construct an image of land of no. In fact, many of us as leaders actively try to break through that barrier, and instead of saying no, be the yes if type of leader. But to your point, there's still this outside perception, and to me, there's a disconnect, right, in our intent and then what's landing. And when I say us, I don't mean just as the CISO or the CSO, but as practitioners in general. And so I want to explore that a little bit, and what you've learned, what you've observed from other partners in engineering, in the CIO shop, in legal, or whomever. But before that, your experience you had with engineering, and I have my own, although it took a while to build those bridges, but once, and I'll talk about how I did those too, but I'd love to hear how you overcame that, because not everybody has a fresh start to do something new, but that doesn't mean, or in a new seat, but that doesn't mean that you can't make change. And so if you find yourself in a position where you're having this struggle, this headbutt, what types of things can you do to start building those bridges again, to take a step back and work with empathy and partnership, instead of how can I yell harder, louder? What lever can I pull to make them listen to me, instead of what am I not understanding? Right. Talk to us about some of the things that you've done.
The important thing is the recognition. If you don't realize that there's a problem, then you can't fix it. And I think stopping and just asking periodically, go to the other leaders and ask, are you getting the support that you need from my team? Are you having issues around velocity? Just ask open-ended questions and don't react to the answer. If the answer is your team's terrible and they're slowing me down, don't get defensive about it. Okay. Because in a way, the fact that they're even telling you that is a step forward.
Right.
They could just go, oh no, it's fine. And then you don't even know that there's a problem.
Right.
So the fact that someone is even willing to admit that there's a challenge is something to capitalize. So it really is a matter of understand, go and ask, just, you know, in your own company who those leaders are, just go and start having those conversations. And once you're aware that there's an issue, it's not just them that you need to work with.
Mm-hmm.
It's the people who work for them and the other people who work with them. And you can ask all of them the same questions. And from just asking the questions of what are the challenges, you can then start to address them. And the challenges are likely going to be approvals take too long, or we wanted to do this thing and the security team didn't understand it, and so they just said no and we didn't move forward. It's going to be a compounding set of little things. It's usually not going to be your team just blocks everything that we do. That's usually not going to be the case. It's going to be a series of little things that add up. And so find out what those are, address them, but also look at the meta trends that come out of those. They're usually going to be around impacting velocity. My career as a CISO has always been for technology companies, for very engineering-centric companies. And the challenges that I've always seen have been related to velocity. And so that's my personal experience. And I think that back to the external perceptions that sometimes exist of, well, I'm not going to go ask security because they're just going to tell me no. That's all about blocking or velocity or impacting the other things that those teams are being asked to do. I generally assume good intent. And so if an engineering team or a product team is trying to release a product or feature, that's because it's good for the company. And so I want to empower that. I want to have that conversation. And, like you said, the yes, if. Absolutely move forward with this crazy idea and add a few additional things on.
Right.
And with that, not only is that team able to maintain their velocity, they're then delivering something that to their customers is more delightful because it improves or at least maintains the security expectations that those teams have. So it's not how do I make this person understand how important security is? It's more around how do you understand how important they are to the business? And then how do you meet them in the middle? Well, frankly, how do you meet them where they are? Mm-hmm. And start with minor security improvements. You could even do some radical changes of your current policies and processes to say, what you're trying to do, our policy won't let you do it. So I'm going to go change the policy, rather than saying, no, you can't do it because our policy says you can't. And over time, and this is not an overnight thing. You have to start rebuilding that trust, or frankly, building it for the first time. And as you're doing little changes, little improvements, that'll really pay off. There's a thing that you'd asked about what other teams are seeing. And one of the terms that I've heard from legal teams in the past is the term the shadow veto. And I thought that was a really great way of describing that. I'm not going to go ask because I know the answer will be no. But the reality is most of the time the answer actually is yes. And people just are making an assumption. So finding out where those exist within the organization will really help. If you can cut some of those off in the past and create a safe environment for people to challenge what they think is convention, then again, saying yes where people would have thought you would have said no will help with those relationships.
I really love that notion of, listening. I think when my experience, I've also been the CISO of tech companies and high engineering focused companies. And you're absolutely right. It generally falls for me into two categories. It's either they want to do something and they fear that we don't understand the context, security doesn't, especially when we talk about crypto or whatever, right? What they're trying to accomplish and why. And we fall back sometimes to, when we get frustrated, we as a industry, we get frustrated with, okay, they're not listening to me. And so I'm just going to fall back to this policy instead of really trying to solve together. Does this policy make sense? Right? Is it something I need to revisit? What is the impact that a one-off would be? And we don't want a bunch of snowflakes generally if you're doing interoperability for lots of things, but having that discussion really, I think, starts to build understanding and cooperation among the team. So it's not so that you can share perspectives. The other thing that I see a lot, and I want to pivot into the data side because I'm a data girl, which is a big old data nerd, Mike. That I see resistance is security is security is responsible for finding the holes, which by nature is not usually good news, and so we're always facing the sentiment of, oh God, here comes AMSI again. Oh, she's gonna tell me I gotta fix something. But I can't tell you how many organizations I've come into to either build, mature, or fix a program where the partnerships were really hindered because the data wasn't good. Like they would hand over a ton of stuff that didn't make any sense. And let's face it, there's very few data scientist CISOs that can clean that up. So I would love, I heard the big sigh. I would love to hear about how your experiences is and what did it feel like when you finally got the ability to hand something over, had really good integrity with the data, where you were able to tell the story, not just with anecdote and examples, but with impact and data that they could rely on? And how did that help you get things done?
Sure. So I worked for a company years ago. I was not CISO at this company. And the team that was managing vulnerability management, so running the scanners, finding vulnerabilities, finding bad news, they created a tool that they literally called Ticket Cannon, because its job was to, as quickly as possible, file tickets around vulnerabilities into the teams that were responsible for the things. And there's no context, there's no nothing. And so the teams on the other end are just receiving this fire hose of who knows what's in there. Like, in there is certainly something important. There's absolutely, in any feed of security information, there's critical data in there. There's really bad news that needs to be dealt with, but it's always together with a whole bunch of other things. Informationals, lows, total false positives, things that are unactionable, things that really, maybe the scanner says this is high, but due to mitigating controls, it's fine. It doesn't matter. So that's absolutely something that, as a security leader, one needs to be careful of, is turning that fire hose on people. You can kind of expect how that's going to go. It's not going to go well.
You'd think so, but
if you can,
people start that way, just throw them all the things.
I think it's one of those. Again, I assume good intent, right? And the idea is, well, we're going to get this in the hands of people who can fix it, and we can't know what the context is. And I think it's good intent, but they don't stop and put themselves in the shoes of the people who are on the receiving side. And what is it that you actually need for it to be actionable? It needs to be relevant to the systems in hand. It needs to take the mitigations and bring those into play. Previous company of mine that I worked for, we built a tool. Its sole purpose was to help us understand the actual severity of a vulnerability within our environment. And it would take into account, is this thing somehow connected to the internet? And you think that's easy, right? You know, what does your security groups in AWS tell you? It's not that easy. As soon as you start layering in proxies, layering in internal API gateways, understanding if an API endpoint is somehow reachable to the internet is non-trivial in a modern tech stack.
It's true.
By building and by understanding whether or not something was connected to the internet, we then laid on external vulnerability information. Is this a vulnerability that is actively being exploited in the wild? Layer that in. And all of these become modifiers to the point where you can go to a team and say, this needs to be fixed now. And if you're only doing that once a quarter, once a year to a specific team, because that's truly where the risk is, they're going to be your best friend. They're going to fix those things. And if you then think about all of the rest of the vulnerabilities, and is there ways that you can re-architect the environment? Maybe you can build an infrastructure and architecture that is ephemeral, that you can just randomly turn off a host and it comes back up totally patched. And you can do that at any point in time. This is chaos engineering, right? If you can build the environment to embrace chaos engineering, then you don't have to pay attention to most of the vulnerabilities. You only have to deal with the most highest ones. And that's where the relationships come into play. Right. You can go back to your engineering, your infrastructure leadership and say, we're seeing all of these vulnerabilities all over the place. These hosts have uptimes measured in years. They're not being fixed. These are risks to the organization. These are potential incidents that we're not going to want to deal with as a company if they happen. How about we look at a new architecture? And that'll take a while. But the fact that you're bringing that idea forward, rather than, I need you to fix all these vulnerabilities immediately, is also helping to build credibility. And that time that it really felt good was this tool that we built for ourselves, engineering adopted to better understand their own environment. And it then became a tool that was being used for other purposes other than just security. And that was when we really knew that we had built a tool that supported the business, not just supported the security team.
I love that. I love that, when we're thinking about how to solve that, if we could come to the table with not just short-term, but long-term solutions and involve them in the planning. I think a lot of times we have our own strategic roadmaps on how to make things easier for us versus how to enable the business with where they want to go. If they want to do, if they're undergoing a digital transformation, they want to be multi-tenant, or they want to go into a specific geopolitical area of the world, right, in the next whatever months. How do we take that into account in order to build and start planning for these mutual beneficial goals? And I think, your story about, and we've all been there, where, we just we think, oh, they're not actioned because they're not seeing it. And so we just assign and we dump all this stuff. But the reality is they're still not seeing it because we've just flooded them with confusion and data. I mean, and sometimes these could be hundreds of thousands of vulns, that are just flooding this ticket system and you can't see anything. Whereas we want to get to a place where we're making sure that the definition of our security program means confidence and clarity on what to do next to be safe, right? And so there's this incredible amount of trust and credibility that gets that gets built when you can say, listen, team, this is what you have to do. These are the 5 things first. And it's going to reduce our risk by this much. And here's why. Here's the impact. Here's the data. Here's what's happening out in the wild. And then you choose, right? This is the compliance. This is what's going to impact if we don't do it, right? This is what we've told the world from our standards that we're going to oblige to. Here's some contractual, so that they're informed, right? And then, if it absolutely cannot be done, then this is the risk that we're going to sign up for as a company, right? But if we start approaching that way with really good guidance, and the guidance just doesn't come from verbal, it comes from making sure we're choosing capabilities that can provide guiding light, and that we're teaching our teams how to use them. Right? That's the other thing.
Yes.
I feel really bad about. Like, we say we want partnerships, but that we don't always invest in our teams to enable them to use the data and the tools properly to build those relationships. Talk to me a little bit about that, Mike, and how you equip your teams to be better partners to everybody that we need to get this done.
Some of it is as simple as a job description, making it clear to. So, current role, we have a team we call security architecture, and we, for a little bit, and organizational reasons, we didn't make this change, but we were going to call them security business partners. And if you've ever heard the term HR business partner or people business partner, it's really that same concept of your job is to deeply partner with this team. So just making that expectation very clear to your own team is very helpful. And then reinforcing that with conversations along the way. And then inevitably what's going to happen is they're going to, from the team that they're working with, bring something back and say, they want to do something that's not in line with our typical security guidance or typical security policies. And I think we should support them, and here's why. And so you end up with this person who's on your security team who's a champion of their partner. And that gives them so much credibility. Mm-hmm. And then you have to support your team. It's your team. It's your job to support your team. And you then are able to give them a win that they're able to take back. And that just builds and builds and builds. So some of it is simply setting expectations and reinforcing those expectations. Another thing can be, someone on your team is like, this vulnerability scanner is terrible. It keeps finding false positives. And then your response should be, tear it out and let's get a new one. Mm-hmm. And you want to make sure that you're empowering your team with relationships and the proper tools, and you're supporting them, and that they feel supported, and that they feel that they can go out into the business and that they can build their own relationships.
Well, Mike, that's amazing. And I want to be respectful of your time. I love those final points. What a great way to wrap up on how, we want to make sure that our teams know that they are as much an advocate from the business to security as they are security to the business, because we're all here to help protect the business and enable it to run. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I really appreciate you, brother. I'm so glad that we're in this fight together. Ryan, do you have any final words for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, AMZ. Thank you, Mike, for this fantastic chat. It's really great to get a look under the hood to see, how those remediation partnerships are built, and to see all that goes into establishing those great relationships with IT. So, really, really appreciate you guys taking the time to have this conversation. Great. Awesome.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the time. It was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, thank you, guys. And thank you to the audience, everyone who attended this webinar. And for those who will watch on demand later, we appreciate you watching. And have a great afternoon and great weekend coming up. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Cheers. Bye.